Me and Karen. A love story, just kidding. Karen is a total bitch. But buckle up because here is my novel. My husband and I are in our late 30s and child free. Some people on child free said I should post here too. So enjoy the saga. My husband and I had been saving up for almost a decade to move to a tropical paradise. About 2 years ago, we bit the bullet and moved to our dream location. Housing here is super expensive, like Hawaii prices. So all we could afford was half of a duplex. It is beautiful and on the water with places for our boat. Unfortunately, Karen, Billy Bob, the boyfriend, and her 3 gremlins live in the other unit. Set up. There is some period of time we just went for a week here and there, but we live here full time now. The entire duplex was owned by an older gentleman who rented out both sides. The sides do not match at all. One side is a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. The other side of the duplex is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. We bought the 5-bedroom. On our side of the property, we have 90% of the backyard, a gazebo, and dockage, about 150 feet since it is on a corner. The other side has a small backyard, patio, and maybe 15 feet of dockage. The rental leases say the renters are entitled to their specific backyards, but there were no fences or anything, so all the renters shared the entire backyard. After we bought the house, Karen immediately tried to throw her weight around that they expected to continue with that privilege. I told her if she asked politely, we would try to accommodate her. She thought this meant she could use our backyard whenever she wanted. Party incident. One day my husband and I are enjoying some drinks outside when a delivery truck shows to set up a giant blow up thing in our backyard. I asked Karen WTF she thought she was doing and she said it was her kid's birthday. Then she had the gall to say it was a family and friends only event. So we had to stay inside our house. Not wanting to be a total asshole and ruin some little girl's birthday, I told Karen after this she had no access to our backyard. Period. Karen shrugged and kept setting up for the party. During the party, a drunk adult wandered into our house which shocked us all. I said Karen's house is the other side and he said, oh. Karen said she owned the whole property and to use whichever bathroom was available. I directed him to Karen's bathroom and soon after she came storming into our house, screaming about how dare we make her look bad to her friends and how selfish we are, we couldn't even spare one bathroom. She said we didn't deserve all this space with just us. I told Karen to get the hell out of my house or I would be calling the cops. She finally left and the party wrapped up shortly after. Backyard remodel. After the party incident, we decided we needed to clearly define the backyard and build a fence. While we were spending the money, we decided to update the patio, put in a fire pit, and an outdoor kitchen. While the contractor was on site, nosy Karen had to come investigate. Since the fence would be the last thing built, I was vague and just stuck to telling her about the patio update. You could see her face light up because of course in her mind, what's ours is hers. When the workers started on the fence, Karen came out screaming for the work to stop. I went outside and told the workers to keep working and told Karen to butt out. Of course in true Karen fashion, she called the cops. What happened next was hilarity on my part after explaining to the cop that we were building a fence on our property and the landlord, of which Karen was not, knew about it. When the cop gave Karen a stern lecture, I thought her head was going to explode. She went back into her house and slammed the sliding door so hard it sounded like something cracked. We got our fence and I thought that would be in the end, but of course not. The boat incident. One day, Billy Bob entered the picture and he was as much a terrible neighbor as Karen. He would throw cigarette butts and empty beer cans over our fence for disrespecting his woman. I didn't know Paradise had trailer trash, but Billy Bob is the epitome of the stereotype. Billy Bob has a boat, a 30-feet fishing boat to be precise. Of course, that side of the duplex only has 15 feet of dockage. Since we have so much dockage and only one boat, we rent out the other dockage spots as month to month. People come and go, so if we don't receive rent from them by the end of the month and the boat disappears, we think nothing of it. We had a renter who tied up their boat on the property line, but Billy Bob wanted to park his boat and needed that space. Karen and Billy Bob posed as us. We were out of town, told the renters to be gone at the end of the month, and then parked Billy Bob's boat on the dockage. I only found out about it weeks later because the renter left a nasty review on the rental site we use. They said we were rude and went back on the verbal agreement to let them stay for 3 more months. I was like, what the fuck is all this? After a phone call, I quickly put 2 and 2 together. I called the cops, who told Karen and Billy Bob they need to move their boat or it would be towed. The equivalent of it anyway. Karen and Billy Bob started screaming the boat is fully on their property. It isn't. Then changed to no one can own the water. True, but a seawall is deeded. That we are liars. And at some point Billy Bob punched a cop and went to jail. I felt bad for the cops, so took them all snacks the next day with a note apologizing for neighbor drama. I ended up winning my small claims suit against them for lost rental income, but of course haven't seen a dime. I eventually convinced the dockage renters to come back and gave them a few months free as compensation. Final revenge. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Get ready for a juicy justice boner. So with the collapsing market, we were trying to figure out what to do with our savings when a perfect opportunity opened up. The landlord who owned both properties was in desperate need of some cash and was tired of managing the property from 2,000 miles away. Because of course Karen is a Karen and called him weekly for every little thing. His only stipulation was we let the poor single mom who has been his renter for 8 years finish her lease, which is up in July. Since we just have money we were trying to reinvest, and because now we get to control our neighbors, heck yeah, we jumped on that. Since we didn't need a realtor or mortgage and an inspection had been done just a year ago for the old landlord to refinance, everything closed in just under 2 weeks. Karen was aware of a change of ownership. We registered the property under an LLC, but didn't know who, until 8 days ago. I went over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. Karen answered with a "what the fuck do you want, cunt?" I smiled, handed her our landlord information, and sweetly reminded her rent was due by Friday, but she could just hand me the check if that was easier. I've always heard descriptions of people's faces turning white, but this was the first time I have actually seen it. I told Karen that we are honoring her lease until the end of July, but afterwards she had better make plans to move because we instead to remodel it before these next tenants moved in. Bye bitch. I make my employer pay my friend's wife what they owe her. About 15 years ago I worked for 3 brothers who jointly owned several diverse businesses. I'm going to be a little vague because even after all this time I never want to speak to any of them again. These guys were real pieces of work who regularly mistreated their employees and each other. Deception, manipulation, coercion, theft. You know the drill. The office was mostly young 20-somethings with limited workplace experience ripe for exploitation. The partnership eventually fell apart with wide-ranging accusations of fraud and theft against each other, and at one point we showed up to work one morning to find everyone locked out. I have so many stories, but the routine that irked me the most was when my manager would randomly show up at someone's desk with a nasty frown on her face and loudly demand, "Come with me. You're wanted in the big boss's office right now." Then you'd silently follow her down the long row of cubicles in the workplace walk of shame, wondering what you had done and if you were going to get fired for it. At the big boss's office he'd let you sweat a little, then just ask for your opinion on some banal shit, or for an update about a project, all of which could have been handled with a simple email. You'd leave thinking you had dodged a bullet, and maybe accept less at your next evaluation period. I stayed for a couple years, became friendly with most of the punes and ended up with a little responsibility and access to some of their corporate data. More on that later. Eventually I moved on, but shortly before I did I helped a friend and shut down a little bit of their thievery. One of the businesses the brothers owned was a publishing company that partially specialized in religious material, and one of my friends at the company was married to an author of children's books. The publishing company picked up one of her books and it was somewhat successful. It sold well and got reprinted twice. So I was surprised to hear from my friend that the company hadn't paid his wife royalties on the book other than the advance against royalties, a normal first payment when an author gets signed. The idea is that if your book doesn't sell well, you're probably not going to make any more money on it. But her book did sell, and the publishing company was pretending that the first print run was almost up, but not quite, and there'd be no further royalties until it was reprinted. Apparently they were trying to renegotiate her contract at a lower rate, telling her they wanted a second print run, but the numbers just didn't work, and maybe she could give them a break on author royalties. So a few days before I left I used my access to generate a report of every single sale of her book, with total sales numbers far over the original print run. and anonymously slipped it to my friend. I learned after I left that, faced with the evidence of their own malfeasance, they were forced to cough up the royalties she was due. Woman damages my mom's car and blames my mom. Her corrupt cop boyfriend covers it up and ruins both of their reputations. I don't know if this counts as pro-revenge or not, but I thought it was pretty funny and they got what they deserved. This post is super long, so I have a TLDR at the end. For some background, I live in a predominantly white suburban town in New Jersey and my family is Asian. Although the town is alright for the most part, it is not really a secret that some of the townspeople are pretty racist. One of our neighbors, let's call him Anthony, is a retired police captain from another town, but he is friends with my town's police chief. My mother is a first-generation immigrant, and although she's fluent in English, she still has a pretty thick Asian accent. A couple of years ago, my mom went to visit one of her friends on the other side of town. My mom had parallel parked directly in front of her friend's house, which is at the bottom of a small hill. As she was leaving, a woman driving a Jeep Wrangler with her children was driving down the small hill, but she was still a decent distance back, so my mom pulled out of her spot. The road they were on was really wide, with enough space to fit 5 cars next to one another, and about 40 feet ahead was a stop sign. My mom at this point was already in the middle of the road, fully out of the parking spot, and had gotten about 10 feet when the woman driving the Jeep suddenly came up from behind my mom's car and cut directly in front of her, crossing a double yellow line to do so. Because of the angle she cut off my mom at, the Jeep's rear wheel ended up ripping off my mom's front bumper. My mom naturally immediately stopped, and the woman got out of her car after straightening it out on the road. As soon as she stepped out of her car, this woman, we'll call her Karen, immediately starts cursing my mom out at the top of her lungs. Karen told my mom to call the police, but my mom told her that her phone had died. My mom's friend and her son, as well as the neighbor, came out of the house after hearing the commotion to see what had happened. The neighbor, an elderly man, asked what happened and Karen yelled, "Are you f***ing blind? A f***ing accident happened. Go call the police. I need to call my boyfriend." The son had taken a law class in college, so he offered to take a bunch of pictures of the scene of the accident and send them to my mom later. This becomes super important later. The neighbor calls the police, but Karen's boyfriend arrives at the scene first. When the cop, let's call him Kenny, finally arrives, he asked my mom what happened. Just as my mom had just started saying her side of the story, the cop says, "Wait just a minute," and walks over to the boyfriend. As it turns out, the boyfriend, we'll call him Sam, was a cop in the town who was pretty popular with the kids in the middle schools, since he would occasionally visit to talk about things like DARE and other things in assemblies. Sam was off duty at the time, so he was able to come over when Karen called him. As soon as Kenny saw his bud Sam, he immediately went to go talk with him rather than with my mom or with Karen. They discuss for a little while and afterwards sent everyone on their way. My mom tried to talk to Kenny before he left, but Kenny just brushed it off and said he got the details he needed and that my mom would be able to get the police report in about a week or two. When my mom receives the police report, she saw that it said that she pulled out without using her blinkers suddenly and hit Karen's car. On top of that, Karen was expecting for my mom's insurance to pay for the damage done to her rear wheel. My mom went to my neighbor Anthony to ask what she should do about the report since it was clearly wrong. Anthony was furious and told her that she should go to the police station and ask to see the chief, and if they ask why she needs to see him, she should tell them that it's because she wants to file an internal complaint. That day, my mom takes the photographs sent to her by the son and goes to the police station and asks the person working the front desk to see the chief. The cop says that she could not just walk in and ask for the chief, so my mom responds, "Okay, so where should I go to file an internal complaint?" And the cop immediately straightens up and says, "Right here, come with me." He leads her into the back. The deputy chief steps into the room and started recording the conversation. Since the chief was out, my mom presented all of the evidence to him instead. After presenting the evidence to show that it was in fact Karen that hit her instead of the other way around, my mom also says that she would like to file a corruption complaint against both Kenny and Sam. Kenny clearly did not do his job properly since he did not properly ask the actual people involved in the accident and did not even note the fact that there were 2 passengers in Karen's car in the report. Even Karen later admitted to an investigator that Kenny never once spoke to her. My mom even threw in the racist card for good measure, saying maybe Kenny wouldn't listen to her and brushed her off because of her thick Asian accent. Sam meanwhile had interfered with the investigation despite not being at the scene of the crime during the time of the accident. The deputy chief says he will start an internal investigation and will see if anything needs to be done. Meanwhile, my mom also filed a claim to her insurance and presented the evidence to them too, and her insurance decides since the accident, in their eyes, was clearly not her fault. They weren't going to pay Karen a penny and that they would contact Karen's insurance to pay my mom instead. A lot of internal bureaucratic investigational bullshit happens, including interviews with Karen, my mom's friend, and a friend's neighbor. About a month passed and an officer comes to our house to tell my mom that Kenny had been punished, but there was not enough evidence to punish Sam, and he just wanted to know if there were any other concerns she had. Since Karen seemingly had not done anything to further warrant any action and the damage to the car was paid for, my mom said that there was nothing else. This is the fun part. 3 days after the officer came to our door, a letter came in the mail for a court hearing. Turns out, Karen decided to file 3 tickets about my mom just 1 day before the statute of limitations. Apparently, in NJ, citizens are allowed to file complaints about other citizens breaking the law, a thing that our family had never heard of before until this happened, and because of how late she filed these complaints, by the time we received them in the mail, we could not even counter complain and the only options were to pay the fine or to go to court. We assumed that Karen learned about being able to file a complaint from Sam, because no shitty, and that the only reason she was willing to go this far is because she heard my mom had a super thick Asian accent and assumed that my mom wouldn't know what to do about the tickets and would just pay up. What she didn't count on was the fact that my mom is actually really aggressive with an absolutely massive network of people that she knows. Within a day, my mom hired a lawyer to fight the case and they immediately asked to change the court from the small court in our town to one of the large courts a couple of towns away. The logic was that if she fought the case in our town, my mom would be at a disadvantage since her case was essentially going against our town's beloved police force, but by putting it in a different town, the playing field would be even. Additionally, while my mom worked from home in her own business, Karen had a full-time job in town, so going to court in a different town would be a huge pain in the ass for her. The lawyer had prepared a huge amount of evidence against Karen, so there was no way she was actually going to win the case no matter what. Come the court date, Karen never showed up, so the case was thrown out. That was a pretty nice win, but what came after was even better. Since my mother and sister have a lot of friends in town, the story of Karen and Sam doing this shady bullcrap got out really fast. Soon, half the town had heard about it, and suddenly Karen and Sam went from 2 favorites in the town because of Sam's reputation to 2 of the most underhanded and nasty people. Sam stopped getting invited to school assemblies and Karen was ostracized in her kids' school's PTA. Anthony also ended up talking to the police chief in private and we found out that although Sam was not officially punished, he was severely reprimanded by the chief.